I'm truly sorry that Emma, the groom's younger sister, is part of our family. To be frank, someone like Emma, who only finished middle school, doesn't reflect well on us. In my opinion, she should avoid family gatherings and be careful about her social standing when she's around us. During the family representative's speech at the wedding reception, the bride's father, his face turning red, shocked us all with his unpleasant words. We were completely caught off guard by his statement, and we were speechless, mouths hanging open. Suddenly, Nate the groom stood up and approached the bride's father with a gentle smile on his face. From our family's perspective, Nate's expression seemed to show anger. When my brother raised his arm towards the bride's father, I quickly stood up to intervene. My name is Emma Brown, and I work at a well-known construction company in the area. Initially, it was tough for me to fit into the mostly male environment, but over time, I've developed good working relationships with the carpenters there. The foreman is still strict and intimidating, but I respect him because he's passionate about passing on his skills to younger workers. After everyone left the construction site, I took a moment to relax and reflect on recent events. Then, I got back to work, silently drawing up blueprints for the next task. By the time I finished, it was already evening, and I realized I hadn't taken a break since lunch. My stomach growled loudly, reminding me to eat. After reviewing the blueprints one last time and giving them my approval, I began tidying up to head back to the apartment provided by the company. That's when I noticed sandwiches on the desk in the rest area, along with a note from the foreman encouraging me to eat. It warmed my heart, and I couldn't help but smile as I gratefully accepted the sandwiches. After securing the premises, I returned to the apartment, and suddenly my smartphone rang. Thinking it might be someone else, I glanced at the screen and was surprised to see my brother's name. We hadn't spoken in years. Unlike me, he's always been exceptionally talented. Despite being a bit laid back at times, he dedicated himself to his studies, graduated from medical school, and now works as a surgeon at the largest hospital in our hometown. Feeling a bit nervous, I placed the sandwiches on the desk and took a deep breath before answering. When I heard my brother's voice, saying he was glad I picked up, my nerves heightened. In a trembling voice, I asked what was going on all of a sudden. He explained, somewhat embarrassed, that he decided to marry his current partner. He knew I might be busy, but he really wanted me at the wedding. We hadn't seen each other in so long, and he'd been thinking about it. It seemed like a good opportunity. He asked what I thought. In a slightly nervous tone, I replied, "Of course." He smiled with great joy, warming my heart. After briefly catching up on our lives, we reluctantly hung up the phone, suppressing the feeling of nostalgia. I don't know much about his partner, but I assume he's already introduced them to our parents. I'll probably have a conversation with them about it before the wedding day. As I idly pondered these thoughts, I couldn't help but feel happy. I decided to warm up the sandwiches the foreman had given me in the microwave and enjoyed my meal. They seemed to taste even better than usual that day. A while later, I received the wedding invitation from my brother. Once the date was confirmed, I talked to the foreman about taking some time off. After a brief pause, he gave me his consent. Relieved by his response, he chuckled and mentioned a condition. There was a request for me to take on the role of a guest lecturer for just 3 days at a specialized construction school run by an acquaintance. I hesitated about my ability to handle the task, but the foreman reassured me. His words gave me determination, and I nodded firmly. As promised, I arrived at the address provided by the foreman. On the designated day and time, I stood in front of a stunning building, surprised to find out it was the entire campus of the specialized construction school. With awe, I entered the building and nervously spoke to the receptionist. They directed me to a preparation room set up for guest lecturers, where I was reviewing my lecture content when there was a knock on the door. A man entered, and I greeted him with a puzzled expression, introducing myself as Emma from the construction company. He stared at me, seeming to assess me, then let out a deep sigh. He remarked that even though it's a prestigious specialized school, it's difficult for him to share his skills easily. We discussed the importance of tradition, yet he expressed disbelief at the idea of allowing a woman in. Despite his words, he urged me to do my best this time. Frustrated by his dismissive comments about women, I met his intense stare and spoke up, emphasizing that gender doesn't determine success in any industry. I asserted that good work is achieved when individual personalities come together, and making such dismissive comments about women only hinders progress. Working in a specialized construction school with such rigid prejudices is unacceptable. This perpetuates the stagnant state of our world. Please, let's not burden the young minds about to enter the architectural world with these outdated biases. Furthermore, I won't approach this as a casual 3-day task. I promise to make those days meaningful for the students. Upon hearing my determination, the man let out a frustrated sigh, seemingly annoyed by confident women who succeeded in male-dominated fields. He walked away, but I stared after him, resolved to deliver a lecture that would inspire the students. With burning passion, I stepped into the classroom and successfully completed my 3-day stint as a guest lecturer. I left the specialized school with warm farewells from the students I connected with. Returning to the construction company, I informed the foreman about the lectures I delivered and the disrespectful remarks made by the person in charge on the first day. After hearing my story, the foreman simply acknowledged the situation. There were no specific criticisms, which relieved me. Filled with joy, I skipped back to my apartment, eagerly awaiting my brother's wedding day, according to my parents who had gathered at a hotel near the venue. My brother's fiancée was named Amy White, a nurse at the same hospital as him. She not only cared for patients but also assisted doctors in the operating room. As I made my way to the dressing room at the wedding venue, I found the dress my mother had prepared. Seeing it, I burst into laughter. It was a fluttery dress, unlike anything I'd worn before. My skilled mother quickly took charge of my makeup and hairstyling. In no time, I found myself feeling too embarrassed to look in the mirror, my flushed cheeks cooling. Despite my reluctance, I couldn't help but feel a bit touched hearing compliments from my parents about how cute I'd looked. Afterward, I made my way to the family waiting room. However, my attention was captured by a particular man in the family waiting room. It was undoubtedly the person in charge of the specialized school who had ridiculed me on that day. With a friendly smile, this man named Kenny White approached us, and it became apparent that he was Amy's father. I did my best to conceal my discomfort, though I was taken aback by the unexpected reunion. I thought we would only have to deal with each other today and wouldn't have any reason to speak in the future. Remembering his words from that day, I suppressed my irritation and proceeded to greet him after my parents. However, he either didn't realize or chose to ignore my discomfort and commented, "You look like a lovely young lady." This remark only increased my irritation. Throughout the conversation, I mostly listened to my parents and avoided unnecessary interjections. However, Kenny seemed considerate and included me, asking about my university. Unable to ignore him, I replied with a forced smile, explaining that I graduated from middle school and started working for personal reasons. For a brief moment, Kenny's smiling face turned slightly distorted, and I felt like he gave me a cold stare. Observing his expression with a furrowed brow, trying not to be noticed, I saw him quickly return to a smile and say, "I see, that's interesting," before changing the subject. Although I felt a strange sense of unease due to that brief change in expression, I focused on my brother and Amy's beautiful wedding ceremony. Amy looked even more stunning than I had imagined in her pure white wedding dress, and my brother, dressed in a matching all-white tuxedo, looked incredibly dashing. Seeing them together made me smile warmly. As we transitioned to the reception, my father suddenly began to look flustered. When I asked him what was wrong, he explained that my brother had asked him to deliver the family's representative speech. As he wiped sweat from his brow and checked his notes, I exchanged glances with my mother and shared a wry smile. The speech from the bride's family representative began before my father's turn, and Kenny seemed to be in high spirits. Seeing his daughter in her bridal attire, Kenny seemed to have consumed quite a bit of alcohol, evident from his flushed face and unsteady demeanor. as he was supported by the bride's mother. Eventually, he made his way to the microphone, still somewhat drunk. As I watched Kenny confidently stand in front of the microphone, despite his inebriated state, I couldn't help but chuckle, noticing his different air of authority compared to my father. With the microphone in hand, Kenny bowed and began to speak, sporting a smirk on his face. He thanked everyone for gathering to celebrate his daughter's wedding, but then took an unexpected turn. He expressed his true feelings, apologizing for the connection between Emma, the groom's younger sister, and his outstanding family. Bluntly, he labeled Emma, who only graduated from middle school, as a disgrace to the family, suggesting she should stay away from family gatherings and be mindful of her social status when interacting with them. His sudden and shocking words left me, my father, and my mother utterly speechless. However, in the corner of my mind, Kenny's earlier expression came to mind, and I felt like I understood the reason behind it. A sense of frustration slowly welled up within me. Abruptly, my brother stood up and approached Kenny with a calm smile. It was clear from my brother's expression that he was upset, a sentiment evident to our family as well. As I saw my brother approaching Kenny and raising his arm, I stood up to intervene and stopped my brother. However, my brother maintained a fixed smile and only took the microphone from Kenny. Seeing this, I halted my movement, and my brother began speaking to Kenny. He expressed disbelief that someone who values connections with people, like Kenny, would be unaware of my sister's profession. To confirm, he asked if Kenny knew my sister's profession properly. Kenny, not understanding the meaning of the question, mumbled in confusion and froze in place. My brother continued, stating that Kenny had personally requested my sister as a lecturer at the specialized school and enjoyed visiting old architectural structures like churches. He revealed that Emma is a master carpenter involved in their restoration. Hearing this, Kenny started trembling and suddenly shouted angrily at my brother, claiming that a woman couldn't handle such a role as a master carpenter. As Kenny continued to make a scene, seemingly forgetting the other guests at the reception, my brother maintained his smile and spoke once more. He pointed out that Emma is a genuine master carpenter trained under the human national treasure, Mr. Herbert Smith. He challenged Kenny's notion that she couldn't handle it just because she's a woman, reminding him that he was the one who reached out to her in the first place. When my brother gestured towards someone, I looked in that direction and noticed the master carpenter sitting quietly in a less conspicuous corner. I was left speechless in astonishment. The foreman, who had been silent up to that point, grinned when he made eye contact with my brother and shot a piercing stare at Kenny. He pointed out that Kenny, being in a position to guide the young folks who will shape the future of the construction industry, harbored such twisted prejudices. He mentioned hearing about what was said when Emma went to teach at Kenny's school. But this is on a whole other level. Whether it's a woman or a man doesn't matter. It's about leveraging each person's strengths to cooperate and become the best we can be. If you keep insisting it's a man's world, you'll be left behind by the times. And by the way, I'm pretty sure I made myself clear during the discussion about the teaching assignment. I said the best apprentice for this task is available. You think I'm underestimating things. If anything, from where I stand, you're the one underestimating us. Intimidated by the thunderous voice echoing through the venue and the piercing gaze, Kenny's confidence seemed to evaporate. He turned pale and muttered an apology before returning to his seat in a daze. The venue remained agitated for a while, but then Amy stood up and, with a composed voice, said, "I apologize for the interruption. Let's take a short break and then resume." With a pale face, just like the stunned Kenny, I glared at his wife, who was frantically calling out to him. She, as if influenced by that gaze, slowly led Kenny out of the venue. When the reception resumed, Amy's parents were no longer present, but she had a refreshed expression, which gradually lifted the atmosphere. In the end, we were able to close it with smiles. Afterward, as the foreman was about to leave the venue, I stopped him and asked about the situation. He explained that despite being asked several times and having a brief conversation, Kenny had knelt and requested him to attend his daughter's wedding. so he reluctantly agreed to participate. When I murmured that it would have been nice if he had told me we were attending the same wedding, he scratched his head with a reluctant look and said, "I didn't think there was any need to say it. Anyway, that guy probably just wanted to somehow establish a connection with me." Even though it happened by chance, the fact that he helped me remains unchanged, so I lowered my head and said thank you. The foreman replied with a wry smile. I'd always tried not to treat people differently just because they're women, but when he said something like that, before he could finish, my older brother arrived and also lowered his head to the foreman, thanking him for responding to the sudden act. The foreman replied, "She is my top disciple, so being silent when someone goes that far is just unreasonable," patting my head. Vaguely remembering the past, I felt the size and warmth of his hand. I was captivated by the work of a carpenter when I was in elementary school. Whenever I had unpleasant experiences at home or school and needed to calm my feelings, I used to visit an old church. It was during one of those visits that I happened to come across the foremen who were repairing that church, and that's how it all began. I watched their work in a place where I wouldn't be in the way, and was completely captivated by their beautiful craftsmanship. From then on, I started researching the history of old buildings like churches and visited them in person. As I grew up, I sought out books about carpentry techniques and devoured them. I was completely enthralled by it all. And when I became a middle school student, I made a certain decision. The decision was that once I graduated from middle school, I would become an apprentice to a master carpenter specializing in old-style construction and learn the craft to become a top-notch carpenter myself. Naturally, my father strongly objected. He said it would be difficult for a woman and that there were more suitable places for a woman to work. He shook his head and refused to agree. But I couldn't give up. Day after day, I continued to persuade my parents. One day, seeing me in that state, my mother came into my room. I had been defeated by my father's arguments, lying face down on my bed. Sitting at the edge of the bed, my mother gently stroked my head and said, "I understand that becoming a carpenter is a challenging path, and I think I'm saying this because you know it. I won't oppose it, but you'll have to show your determination to your father." After thinking it over for a while, I felt that this was the only path for me, so I visited the construction company and lowered my head to the foreman, who had already been recognized as a living national treasure at that time. I asked him to take me as his apprentice. At first, I was turned away from a place where women weren't traditionally allowed to enter. However, I kept going for several months. Even if I couldn't get inside the shop, I continued to wait for the foreman to come out and kept bowing my head. Then, during the winter of my second year in middle school, after numerous attempts at pleading, the foreman finally burst into laughter. He walked towards me, surprising me, and said, "I'm going to visit your parents right now." On the day when the foreman actually came to our house, my parents were bewildered. But the foreman bowed deeply in front of them and said, "This young woman will surely become a top-notch carpenter someday. I can see a burning passion in her eyes. Please believe in me and entrust your daughter to me." Saying so, the foreman looked at me with a kind gaze and gently placed his hand on my head. Even though my father still seemed reluctant, my mother, with tears welling up in her eyes, said, "Please take care of her." Seeing this, my father also lowered his head towards the foreman, holding back tears. And my older brother, who had witnessed many arguments between me and my father, looked at us with an indescribable expression. It's a memory that I still vividly recall to this day. While I was determined to take the first step towards my dream, the days that followed were by no means filled with only enjoyable moments. After graduating from middle school, and with my parents' permission, I moved into the apartment provided by the construction company and began learning the job. However, at first, I was often assigned to site cleanup, which was extremely physically demanding, and I struggled to keep up with my senior colleagues. Every time the work was delayed because of me, there were many instances where my senior colleagues got angry, saying things like, "This is what happens with women," or "Don't come here with half-hearted determination." Nevertheless, I didn't let it discourage me. I continued to watch and learn from the foreman and my senior colleagues' techniques, occasionally receiving guidance from the foreman himself. Before I knew it, I had grown to the point where I was entrusted with tasks alongside my senior colleagues. They began to acknowledge my skills more and started to smile and interact with me more. Finally, I started to find enjoyment in my work. I had thought that it would take much longer to earn the foreman's recognition, but just a while ago, he clearly stated that I am his top disciple. I was so happy and grinning, but then he reminded me not to get too carried away, saying there's still a lot to learn. It felt like the usual foreman had returned, and I couldn't help but straighten my posture. Watching the exchange between me and the foreman, my older brother chuckled and looked at me straight in the eye. Emma, there's something I've wanted to say for a long time. Seeing you face your dream of becoming a carpenter head-on and working hard to make it a reality, well, it made me realize that I could do more. It inspired me to strive for the highest I could reach in my own studies, which led me to become a doctor and help many people. I believe that if I hadn't witnessed your determination that day, I would have lived a much less fulfilling life. So, thank you truly. As he said this, I tightly squeezed my brother's outstretched hand while trying to hold back tears. It felt like a warm sensation was flowing into my heart, and both our parents and the foreman were watching us, brother and sister, with kind eyes. In the end, after that incident with Kenny and the fear of upsetting the living National Treasure foreman, Kenny experienced his first setback. Having never faced failure before, having graduated from a prestigious university, he struggled to bounce back from it, and eventually, he decided to step down from his position as chairman of an educational institution, passing it on to his successor. Amy shared this with me when she came to apologize to me again. She was apparently fed up with her father, who was obsessed with academic achievements, and her mother, who accommodated that mindset. So when I saw Amy laugh confidently and declare that she was cutting ties with them, I couldn't help but exchange a knowing smile with my brother, both of us chuckling. I continued to learn the craftsmanship of a carpenter under the foreman while working harmoniously with my senior colleagues. In reality, I've taken on another job. It's a job that the school formally requested after receiving requests from students who had previously taken special lectures. I teach carpentry techniques at a construction-focused vocational school twice a week. Both jobs are fulfilling, and I am currently leading a very satisfying life. One day, when I reported about my work at the vocational school, the foreman suddenly burst into laughter with a joyful expression on his face. If I hadn't met you, I probably wouldn't have allowed women on the construction side even now. And I never even thought about passing on my skills to people with such different aspirations like this. You're the one who changed me. Watching the foreman laugh like that, I couldn't help but smile, and I felt a warmth spreading through my heart. I thought to myself that it was a good decision to work here.